Welcome all to the first episode of the With the Homies review. This week's game review will be Remedy Studios' Control. From the very studio that brought you Alan Wake, Quantum Break, and one of my favorite games of all time, Max Payne, comes their next creative endeavor, Control. Not the most inspiring name for a game, but it definitely does a good job of using its title to sum up the story, because you're going to be doing a lot of controlling in that shit. From the manipulation of gravity, time space, your enemies, and nearly everything in your environment to either use as a projectile or a shield, Control is one thing that you're definitely going to have. The game starts out with the main character, Jesse Faden, arriving at the headquarters of the ever-clandestine agency of the FBC, otherwise known as the Oldest House, an infinite, constantly shifting space connected to various alternate dimensions through rooms known as thresholds. The FBC, or the Federal Bureau of Control, is responsible for investigating paranormal phenomenon and activity. Just think of Fox Mulder and X-Files on crack, but, minus the actual aliens. I'm going to say right now that there's a lot of confusing jargon in this game, so I'm going to try my absolute best to explain it. There are paranormal events manifested by the collective human unconscious known as AWEs, which then create these things called altered items, as well as objects of power, which are almost like ghost-possessed objects that can give certain special people the ability to control them and gain special powers through a place called the Astral Plane. The Astral Plane is an alternate dimension where a hive mind, known as the Board, resides. It's an extra-dimensional entity who communicates to these special people via a massive upside-down black pyramid. The Board also grants the FBC's leadership through an object of power called the Service Weapon, and whoever the Board chooses to wield the Service Weapon is considered by default to be the director of the Federal Bureau of Control. And if your brain isn't already absolutely fucking melting out of your forehead, then I got a treat for you. Now that I've already got you nice and confused, Jesse, the main character, comes to arrive at the Old House through the guidance of Polaris, a paranatural entity that rests in her subconscious, which rescued her and her brother Dylan during their childhood. Jessie is on the search for her brother Dylan, who you come to learn was abducted by the FBC 17 years ago during a Altered World event, or an AWE, that occurred in their hometown of Ordinary, Wisconsin, in which a slide projector, object of power, capable of opening portals to other dimensions, basically erased the adult population of the town. The FBC basically came through and put hands on Jessie and her brother, and took him, and now she's here to try and find him. I don't want to give away too much of the story, and it's also a complete fucking mindfuck that I'm unsure I'll even be able to adequately explain any further. But it's a good mindfuck, trust me. Like Remedy's other titles, Control is set in the third-person perspective, so that may be a turn-off for some of you first-person shooter heads. But it almost feels like it's a collection of all of their games prior. At points I get feelings of Max Payne, Alan Wake. It feels like this game is everything Quantum Break was not, which is definitely a good thing. As I stated earlier, throughout the game and her journey, Jessie will obtain various powers from these objects of power she interacts with. From the manipulation of gravity and levitation, to ripping a sheet of concrete out of the ground in front of you and making it into a shield, pulling an enemy's rocket fired at your direction out of the air and hurling it back at them, or just picking up a trash can and repeatedly launching it at waves of bad guys coming your way. With some games, the abilities and powers tend to get old after a while, but in Control, each power feels meticulously created and has more uses than meets the eye. From various plot points throughout the story, one can tell that they definitely created this game around these powers. Like how most games this generation feel, they weren't just elements thrown in at the last minute or in some DLC pack. Each one feels deeply fleshed out, and still, after 100 times of dashing through the air, around my enemies like I'm Superman, and raining pillars of rocks down on them until there's nothing but a smoldering pile of rubble, the combat never gets old. I thought the music was actually pretty dope, but at times it doesn't fit the tone of the story. Ranging from 1970s rock and roll to haunting piano pieces, it sounds almost more like an Ozzy Osbourne wannabe side project than a soundtrack for a video game. The ambient pieces that play outside of the cutscenes are fantastic. And a fun fact, I learned that the composer of the soundtrack actually burned a piano in order to get some of the sounds that he produced for the game. And at points it really sounds that way. The music has that atmospheric, creepy, haunting feel that leaves me wondering what's wandering around the next corner. The world and landscape of Control is almost like you stumbled into an office high on LSD. It has a very bureaucratic feel with a lot of white walls, concrete structures, American flags, long winding hallways, and tall ceilings, as if you're inside of some creepy government building. But throughout the game, you will reach areas where there are either objects of power or an AWE occurred, and much of the landscape will then turn into a game of Tetris with jagged pieces of concrete jutting from the ground and the ceiling, the floors and walls turning into a Rubik's Cube of blocks and layered stone. My personal favorite piece of this world is the Ocean View Motel, a 1970s motel that is actually another dimension that exists within the FBC headquarters that you use to get to other dimensions that exist in the headquarters. Confused? It's like something out of a David Lynch movie, and I fucking love it. Much of the game is open right from the beginning, so it feels very much like an open world experience. You're free to wander, kill hordes of enemies, inspect the nearest janitor's closet, even complete side missions. And when it comes to lore, it is ripe with typeface letters, cassette recordings, clues, and a bevy of other things that help to deepen and lend to the story and characters in the game. If you love the color red, for all my bloods out there, this is the game for you. The color and lighting of the game is absolutely beautiful, especially in HDR. It is one of the first games to actually support real-time ray tracing, and it definitely shows. Even the smallest detail, from walking between rooms or by a window that the sun is peeking ever slightly through, you can see that detail, care, and passion that went into the development of this game. Control is not a very long game, which isn't always a bad thing. I would say it's roughly 12 hours to 100% it to do all the side missions as well as the main story. But in today's climate and society, that isn't a bad thing. Some people don't have time to sit down and play a 60-hour or even more game. They just want a game for a couple hours here or there and enjoy themselves from start to finish. And with Control, this is the type of product that you will get. It is not a masterpiece in any sense of the word, but it is definitely a great game that shouldn't be ignored, especially if you're a fan of Remedy's previous titles. It's been your homie Potter, and for the very first episode of the With the Homies review, I am giving Remedy's Control a very solid 7.5 out of 10.